So in this video, we'll look at vocabulary in context questions, and this is a question type that has a lot in common with another question type, and that is the text completion question. How is that, you ask? Well, we're trying to identify the meaning of a given word or phrase in the context of the passage, but really in the context of a particular sentence. So what that means is you can treat the word that they're asking about as if it were a blank, and then come up with your own synonym. We'll note that that's what we do with the text completion questions. Those start with blanks that we fill in. The difference is here, we're starting with a word that they're asking about, but if you treat that word like a blank, it basically turns this into a text completion question. And provided that you've watched those videos, you already know how to deal with those. If you haven't, you can consider this a little preview of the text completion section. But in any event, we want to avoid the temptation to plug in answer choices because that can lead to second guessing, and you can also end up justifying a wrong answer choice. In other words, you take one or more of the answer choices, you plug it into the sentence, you read it with that word, and you say, that kind of makes sense. This other one kind of makes sense. So we want to avoid that. We want to instead actively think of a synonym and then use that as the approximate answer to compare with the actual answer choices. So again, reading the sentence, treating the original word as a blank. Identify the key word, the clue, and the transition. So terminology that will be familiar to those who have watched the text completion videos already. But the key word is what the word in the blank, the word in question, is describing or referring to. The clue is going to be some word or phrase that clues you in as to what needs to go in the blank or what needs to replace the word in question. And the transition, if present, is going to be a word or phrase that determines the relationship between the keyword and the clue. And we'll see some more specifics in just a minute. Then we want to come up with our own word, the guide or the approximate answer to put in the blank, and then select the answer choice that best matches that. So let's look at an example. And this is taken from a passage that we read earlier, but we'll go ahead and read this sentence. They're asking about the word temporal. But researchers found a surprising blank relation between subjective experience and objectively measured neural events. In direct contradiction of the classical conception of free will, neural preparation to move preceded consciousness awareness of the intention to move by hundreds of milliseconds. Okay, they found a surprising blank relation. Well, we notice that they're talking about a sequence of events in time. So, what kind of relation? The key here is that one thing preceded some other thing, and then the transition is basically the colon here. What comes after the colon is describing or explaining what this surprising finding was. So if we're talking about a sequence of events, time-wise, that's not perfect by any means, but we want to remember that our guide word, our approximate answer, doesn't have to be exact. It gives us something to go on when we look to the answer choices. And once we do that here, we'll note that secular is not a good match for time-wise or temporal. Secular means the opposite of religious, something that is not concerned with or pertaining to spiritual, religious matters. Mundane means ordinary, run-of-the-mill, the opposite of extraordinary. Numerical, well, they might be making numerical measurements as far as measuring times, but that is not the same thing as time-wise. Physiological, they're dealing with physiological phenomena in some sense, talking about neural activity, but they're not talking about a physiological relation. Chronological. We might have come up with that word initially, but what I want to emphasize here is that the first word you come up with doesn't have to be perfect in order for you to get the correct answer. We just want to think about what's going on, come up with something, and then use that something as a guide to find the correct answer. So let's look at a second example. Among academics involved in the study of Northern Renaissance prints, or reproducible graphic artworks, an orthodox position can be said to have emerged. This position regards Renaissance prints as blank representations of their time, documents that reliably record contemporary events, opinions, and beliefs, and therefore as important means of accessing the popular contemporary consciousness. In contrast, pioneering studies take a strikingly different approach according to which these prints were purposeful, active, and important shaping forces in the communities that produced them. So this one's a little different in its format than the previous one, but it's still a vocabulary and context question. It says replacement of the word passive with which of the following results in the least change in meaning. So in other words, which of these words is closest in meaning to passive in the context of this passage. So our keyword or phrase, representations of their time, that's our key phrase because the word in the blank is going to be describing the nature of those representations. Our clue, we have a couple of them. This portion in green, we're talking about documents that reliably record contemporary events, opinions, and beliefs. So a certain position regards Renaissance prints as blank representations of their time, so they reliably record contemporary events, opinions, and beliefs. But then we have this transition. In contrast, these new studies show that they were purposeful, active, and important. So what goes in the blank is going to match up with reliably record, and it's going to be the opposite of purposeful, active, and important. So we could say objective. So objective as opposed to subjective. So if they're reliably recording something, it's kind of like a scientific instrument. They're just taking something down. They're not putting their own spin or their own interpretation or shaping forces on it. So we use that word. We look to the answer choices. Disinterested, that is a pretty good match. Why? Because disinterested means you're not putting your own personal interests into something, your own point of view or perspective or take. But let's look at the others. Submissive, no. So that could be a synonym of passive, but not in this context. Flaccid, a plant that hasn't been watered could be described as flaccid. It loses its shape. Not the right word here. Supine, that means lying down. So to be in a supine position. So again, that could be a synonym of passive in some other context. And then unreceptive, no. So there's our correct answer, objective. Maybe not the first word that you would think of as a synonym for passive, but that's why we want to cross the word out. We don't want to be distracted by the original word because they're never going to be asking you which of the following means the same thing as this word in general. It's not in general, it's in context.